Chapter 112 to 115. Steam curled from the tea into the pleasantly warm air. I watched it disappear, dispersing the smell of fruit throughout the room, trying to marshal my thoughts into something resembling order. "You are not angry with me, are you?" asked Helena. Her own tea was similarly untouched. I raised my head to stare at her before mustering a smile. "Not about this." I insisted, and she relaxed a smidgen. The matter with Alice still rankled, but I had said what I needed to say on that matter. Anything more would mean repeating myself. "I am merely worried for you. You will accept a midwife, will you not?" "Aegon has been frantic. He wanted to bring the matter up with you himself," she told me, a small smile fighting its way onto her face. It was still incredibly creepy to me that they were married. I had hoped that my increased political maneuvering would force Alicent to seek strategic marriages for the two of them and not incest. Yet she had sought the legitimacy it would offer over the power the marriages could bring, and my siblings were betrothed. It had not gotten off to an amazing start. Aegon had been hoping for a Lannister match, I think, and had made his dissatisfaction with his mother's choice very clear when Daeron had been betrothed to Syrell Lannister and not he to Jocasta Lannister. Certainly the sour look on Alicent's face when he spent the entire betrothal feast by my side, badgering me for information about dragons, was something I would treasure for the rest of my days. Helena had gone one further, in typical Helena fashion. It had taken an official order from father to make her come home for the wedding, her way of making clear that she did not approve. Helena loved her mother, but the two got along like water and oil. Leave them in the same room together without a go-between, or worse, only Aegon, and the two would be at it like cats before an hour. Yet I never missed my own mother more fiercely than when I saw them reunited after Helena's frequent trips to the Vale, in which Alicent would cling to her and weep, and even Helena had teary eyes. "I shall make an appointment for you," I told her. Then a flicker of amusement went through me, despite my misgivings. "As long as you promise to let me be there when you tell Alicent you intend to employ one." Helena pulled a face, scooping up her tea and taking a hesitant sip. No doubt she was thinking on the inevitable argument that would provoke. Alicent would see it as a betrayal. She'd been furious enough when father had thrust Alanis upon her for Viserys' birth. "Mother does not know yet," she replied finally. "Aegon and I want a little more time without her being completely insufferable." I remembered well how everyone had sought to wrap me in cotton wool until I felt I could not even breathe without someone fretting over my health, and if I thought father was bad, Helena would be dealing with him and Alicent combined. I caught her eye, noting the look of someone who was staring down 9 months of imprisonment at the hands of her frantic mother. True imprisonment would probably be kinder, as she wouldn't have to deal with Alicent hovering over one shoulder and Grand Maester Edmund hovering over the other, cataloguing her every move and breath. "I will not be able to help you on that front, I am afraid," I told her, sipping my own tea and savoring the fruity flavor. "Alicent would take my interference poorly. She will already see a midwife as an unacceptable overstep on my part." Helena tried to smile, but it turned into a grimace halfway through. "Is it wrong to fear what her influence may do to the babe?" I raised an eyebrow at that, and she sighed. "Aegon and she put so much pressure on us. Even now, if I am carrying a boy, she will do the same to him." "It is not wrong to fear such a thing," I told her, and she did smile at that. "You have my support, Helena. I will be by your side the moment you need me. Even if what you need me for is distracting your mother." That startled a laugh from her, but there were tears in her eyes when she leaned across to embrace me. I held her tightly, fighting the misgivings her words had awoken in me regarding my own children. The slithering suspicion that they would come to see me in the way Helena saw Alicent. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are the best sister I could have asked for." "Oh, I'm quite sure you could do better," I told her, drawing back. "For example, when it comes to telling father, you are on your own. I have had quite enough sore ribs to last me a lifetime." That set her laughing, and by the time I left she looked much more at ease. If only I could have that. The way she'd spoken of pressure, of how she feared her own sons would be caught in the same trap. Eamon, was I doing the same thing to him? When it came to him, all I could see were the potential rumors. He was 8. My son should be able to enjoy his hobbies. I shouldn't have to force him to the mold of the perfect prince. Yet that was exactly what I was doing every time I forced him to attend training or accompany me through my day, so that he could begin to understand what was in store for him when I took the throne and he was my heir in turn. He was a quiet boy, and all he wanted to do was create, to draw or paint. He was good at it too, for an 8-year-old anyway. I decided that whatever else I had on my schedule for today could wait, and I began my hunt for him. I had always known I would not be the best parent. I had known that since I had promised away 3 of my 4 children before they could even walk. Yet I hadn't thought myself too terrible, at least until I had somehow missed Alice charging up the side of a mountain and Jocelyn's resentment towards me. What was I potentially missing with Eamon? He was drawing when I found him, perched on a balcony overlooking the dragons, a chunk of charcoal moving across the paper. His tongue was poking out of his mouth, as it so often did when he was completely focused. Gods, he looked so much like Laner. There was no question at all as to who had fathered him. I watched for a while as he began finishing up, admiring the skill he had even at his young age. Had I tried such a thing, it would have been a smudged mess. Tessarion, I said, when he was finally done and was rewarded with his fright. He dropped his charcoal and peered around before a smile lit up his face. Mama, he cried before throwing himself at me. I caught him and lifted him up high, whirling him around as Laner was fond of doing. You got it right. It's the horns that give it away, I told him, and his grin grew even wider. It's very good. You must do one of Syrax for me. I will, Mama, he promised, then his smile dimmed and he looked at me almost warily. Are you here to tell me off? And why would I do that? I asked carefully. He sighed and adopted his usual solemn expression. It had never torn at me this way before. Damn it, Helena, couldn't you have chosen your words more carefully? Because I didn't go to training like I promised I would, he admitted. I skipped it to go draw Tessarion. I sat down on a nearby bench and drew him onto my lap, a lump in my throat at his expression. It had been like watching a light bulb switch off. Was that happy little boy my son and the solemn one I knew so well what he felt he had to be around me? Why did you skip your lesson? I asked, searching for any hint of the answer in his features. He squirmed under my scrutiny. Dayron is asleep and he won't wake up for ages. So I can draw Tessarion now without him yelling at me. If I went to practice I wouldn't finish it and then he would be able to catch me. I smiled at the explanation. My son was delightfully straightforward. I doubt it had even occurred to him to lie and claim he wasn't feeling well or some other excuse. I lifted up the drawing again, staring at it. It's a very good picture of Tessarion, I told him. But why would Dayron yell at you? Dayron is mean, he cried, louder than he intended if his wince was any indication. He shouted at Jocelyn and he wouldn't let me teach Vis a dance once. I had known Darren's temperament, of course. Sniveling little bully. I'd caught him teasing Jocelyn over a few weeks ago and given him a tongue lashing for it only for him to tell Alicent I'd yelled at him for playing with his nieces. It had taken Ser Stefan relating the tale to my father for the truth to come out, and even then Alicent had demanded I leave any punishment to her when it came to her children. Which would be tantamount to no punishment at all. I deeply regretted not taking the chance to have him fostered out when father had given me the decision. Enough about Dayron, Eamon, I said, and he nodded. How was the market yesterday? Oh. It was very fun, although everyone was very upset about Alice. Can we go again? I refused to let his comment about Alice dim my smile. We might, but I do not see why we cannot go to the bigger markets in King's Landing. He went very still as the possibilities made themselves known. Maybe we could explore lots of King's Landing, he asked. I want to see the Great September Lady Fell says there are some very good paintings and tapestries there and Emma wants to go and see Septon Patrek anyway. I blinked at the sudden word vomit before filing away the interesting news that Emma was agitating to go for later. My youngest was even quieter than her brother and much more well-behaved than her sisters, preferring to spend her days quietly in the company of Septilela. Perhaps a trip there would be a suitable reward for the both of them? I doubted it would interest the twins somehow, so it could be a nice thing for my youngest children and I to do together. We could, I said slowly, and he realized where I was going straight away. But only if I work hard at training, he asked, not as upset as I thought he would be. I would accept attending all your lessons for a month, I told him, and he rolled his eyes. Why go if I don't work hard there? He asked, as if the idea of merely turning up was not one he'd even entertained before. I tried to cover my amusement at that up with my hand, but he spotted it anyway and pouted. Oh my dear boy, I chuckled. You are a treasure. Now, how would you like to spend the day with your dear mother? Really? He asked, his eyes flickering to his drawing. Oh? What is this? My own son does not wish to spend time with me? I cried, throwing myself to my feet and sending him scrambling away with laughter. Mama! I do want to spend time with you, he said, wrapping his arms around my midsection. But I thought you had lots to do? Lots to do, certainly, but nothing is more important to me than you all, I told him, and he beamed up at me. Besides, spending the day with you is much more fun than spending the day with my lords. Well, he said. If it's more fun with me then I wouldn't mind, but if people will get angry at you, you shouldn't make them wait. No one will be angry, I told him, kneeling down to his level. And if they are, for whatever reason, they will have me to deal with. Alright, he mock-sighed, adopting his solemn expression once more. I suppose I could spend the day with Mama. I swear he gets this side of him from Laner. I was somehow not surprised when Rhaenys invaded Laner and I's room on the Princess Rhaenyra. Anyone else might have been wary about barging into the private quarters of the heir to the throne and her husband, but Rhaenys wasn't just anyone. Mother, said Laner, half rising out of his chair and dropping the book he'd borrowed from his father's library. He was beaten to the hug by Emma, all but flying from her position on the carpet and entangling herself in her grandmother's legs. Thought I'd come straight to the source. Why did Viserys cut our little trip short? Asked Rhaenys, crouching down to her youngest grandchild and gathering her on her knee. It was an odd feeling to be looking down at Rhaenys Targaryen, given our height disparity. She'd boarded with us, after father had decided it was time for us all to leave, instead of boarding the sea snake with Corlys as I'd expected her to. I should have known it was because she wanted information and not because Corlys was returning via Driftmark as opposed to our more direct trip. Rioting in Dorne, I told her, although I could tell that answer had not satisfied her. I groaned and sat up on the bed, putting aside my book. Emma pulled a face at me, evidently recognizing the adults would engage in boring talk and her grandmother was unlikely to play dolls with her just yet. Behind Rhaenys, Laner swiveled around in his chair. It's the second time this month. And the boy he put in charge can't deal with it, she scoffed. Gwaine is hardly a boy, mother, and he has dealt with it. No deaths and only a few injuries, all ringleaders brought to justice, said Laner. I'd filled him in on the news the moment father had told me, if only so he could prepare the Princess Rhaenyra for the announcement and ensure his men were all present, correct and at least mostly sober. Then what has your father so spooked? Asked Rhaenys. The fact that it is the second time this month, as like as not. Yet not enough for him to agree to let me take Aleandra home. The Lady of Driftmark's lips pursed at that news. She was not my ward's greatest fan and she did not approve of father's decision regarding her marriage. Unsurprising. You know what the Dornish are like. What's to stop her poisoning you? Poisoning any you bring with you, she asked in tones just the wrong side of frosty. Over her shoulder, Laner rolled his eyes theatrically. Rhaenys had never truly forgiven the Dornish for the ambush. I don't even think it was the wounds that stung, but the fact she had been pulled back from the front lines and had missed all the action. And that, subsequently, had led to the first crack in Lena's mental health. Although I wasn't sure how right she was in blaming the Tollans for being murdered as they surrendered. It was Ser Dickon Bulwer's fault more than anything and, well, he was far beyond anyone's reach now. The Dornish are treacherous, or so people say. Aleandra is a good girl and she has never shown any of this supposed nature to me, I said, thinking of the girl who tried so hard to be older than she was. Well, she'd had to grow up fast in such a hostile court where even grown men would join in on the bullying. Not even my protection could see her safe from sneers and the stories spread by the other Dornish hostages. There is time for her to grow into it yet, Rhaenys grumped. Do you have so little regard for my ability to raise children? I asked, but it seemed Emma had finally catoned on to what we were talking about because she squirmed off of her grandmother's lap and stood to look her in the eyes. Grandmama. You mustn't be angry with Ollie, she's nice, my daughter told her, very seriously. I struggled to contain my giggles at the surprised look on Rhaenys' face and Laner was forced to hide his grin behind his hand. Out of the mouths of babes, she finally said after a moment of silence had passed. I am not angry with Aleandra, Emma. She seems like a nice child. She is nice. She caught a cat for me in the market. And she lets me borrow the nice scarves her mama brings her. I caught Laner's eye with a meaningful look and he rose from his seat with a chuckle. Come along, little one, let's leave your mother and grandmother to talk. She pouted as she was lifted up, squirming in his arms until she could see me once more. You will tell grandmama that Ollie is nice, won't you? She asked me plaintively. Of course. Now, go and find Auntie Lena for me and keep her company, I told her, standing up to help Rhaenys to her feet. There was an audible crunch as she stretched and I grimaced in sympathy. Don't get old, Rhaenyra, she told me with a chuckle. It's not all it's cracked up to be. She took Laener's recently vacated seat and sighed. How is Lena? She asked a moment later, as if she were debating on even asking. Then added, sadly. She does not come to me with her problems anymore. Better, I told her. She picked up a few knocks on her travels, but she is better. Rhaenys nodded and we were both silent for a while as Laener's ship creaked and groaned around us and the waves battered the sides. How serious is the Dorne matter? She asked suddenly. Bad enough. Nothing widespread, but more and more people call for Prince Garen's return these days. The stony Dornish are almost certainly backing him, the Vulture King grows bolder by the day and neutral lords are beginning to waver, I explained. Ghost Hill has become a rallying point for them, Lord Allard Toland a figurehead. This Miles Sam does not help matters either. The bastard, grunted Rhaenys, and I smiled, surprised she'd even heard of the name. A rabble-rouser that had been given control of Ghost Hill as regent for his young sister until she gained her majority and returned home. Then, he would become our hostage in turn as Miles Toland, legitimized bastard. He has a year left as his sister's regent. Lord Dane believes he may be reluctant to give the post up to his sister and become a hostage. If he does refuse Lord Dane's commands, a second army turning up at Ghost Hill would not look good for our side. Rhaenys snorted. Sounds like Garen is the issue. Can my beloved Goodson not aid you in this matter? Rhaenys asked. A dagger may solve what swords cannot. Contingent on the dagger reaching him. He has proved elusive so far, I admitted, and she leaned forward, rubbing her hands over her face. I don't like this, she said finally. Seems everywhere has something going to shit these days, and it stinks of her doing. Our good queen? Surely not, I mocked, and she smiled, although there was no joy there. Perhaps I should give thought to my procession once more. You should have been and gone already. Your father should have had one long before our grandfather died. I picked up the usual judgment in her tone when she'd spotted what she saw as a failing in us. Although these days she was much less vocal about it. He feared you might come and steal back your crown if he abandoned the capital. As for me, you know I planned one. Then Dorne and Aemon and dash. Never enough time, said Rhaenys, ignoring my jab about father. Perhaps you should make time. I have the children to think of, Aegon constantly looming over my shoulder, and I dread to think of what Alicent would do with the capital as her uncontested playground. Not to mention the duties I had as my father's heir and Lady of Dragonstone. Excuses. Pretty ones, but excuses all the same. She pushed herself forward and met my eyes. You have gotten too comfortable this past decade. You're letting Aegon do as he wishes, you are letting Alicent plot against you in the shadows. The Renner back then would have had a plan in place to deal with Larry Strong by now, she would be dealing with Aegon and Aemond dash. The Renner back then walked straight into Otto's trap and got us mired in a war with Dorne. I shouted, standing up, suddenly full of restless energy. If I make another mistake like that, what do I risk then? Lena? Laenor? Joffrey? My children? Are you your father's daughter as I once feared? Rhaenys hissed, standing and towering over me. You seem happy to merely hold your position. To merely respond to the plots of others. Exactly as your father would do in your shoes. Anger slithered through my veins at the accusation, igniting into a burning fury that robbed me of my ability to even scream at her for such an insult. I am far from passive, Rhaenys, far from it. I have brought my loyal lords to court, I have shored up my support, I have 2 lots of professional soldiers ready to move, the small council is loyal to me, the gold cloaks are loyal to me, the Kingsguard are loyal to me. What more do you want? I managed to choke out, trembling with the sheer rage that accusation brought. I tried to tell myself it was because she did not know about Canon Rhaenyra. That version had done nothing, had hidden on Dragonstone for most of her life, and had made bad decision after bad decision. Even then she had come so close to victory over her half-brother. I was not her, I had done more than she had ever done. If the dance kicked off, then King's Landing would fall behind me. There would be no riots, no stolen treasury, and no loyal lords killed for their support. Soon after, the Stormlands and the Vale would declare for me, the North would not interfere, and Dorne was more likely than not to declare for me as well. The Riverlands would bow to pressure from the Vale as long as the Lannisters were kept busy by my Rain allies and their little coalition. That left the core Greenlands, and many in the Reach were standing ready to give the Hightowers what they so richly deserved. Aegon could call for his great council all he wished, he would not get it. There was no true dispute, not after my father had been so vocal in his choice of heir, and Helena would ensure he fell in line soon enough. "I'll not deny you've done much in the past," said Rhaenys, interrupting my thoughts on the matter. "But it bothers me you could be doing more. You have shown the ability to do more. What was the college if not the start of a fight against the maesters and their Hightower overlords? What was this whole business with your septon if not working to break Old Town's stranglehold on the faith? Such things do not happen over days. It is as Laenor so often says, I am seeking a throne, not the total reformation of Westeros," I snapped. "Bah." I sensed she was well aware she'd roused my anger, and it only further annoyed me she seemed not to care. "Your daughters have more fire than you these days. I suppose Laenor told you what happened?" I asked through gritted teeth. Rhaenys chuckled before stretching, filling the cabin with yet another crack. "Joffrey, actually. Boy seemed to think I should persuade you to punish Alice more harshly," she explained. "I admit she can be trouble at times, but she is showing the backbone you appear to have lost. Or are you denying you did the same thing when you were even younger than her?" I stared at her, at the way she was meeting my eyes so defiantly, and had a small revelation. This wasn't a new frustration. She'd been feeling this way for a long, long time, and now it was all coming out. "How long have you been waiting to have this conversation?" I asked, and she shook her head again. "A few years, since Emma was born." "Ah. 6 years then. I am not 19 anymore, Rhaenys. I have made my mistakes, and I have learnt the lessons they imparted well. Corlys, Otto, Larys all had been harsh teachers. That's horse crap, and you know it." I winced at the sheer frustration in her voice. "Corlys once complained you were doing too much, too fast, that you played the game too aggressively. Now he complains you barely play it at all. What new lords have come to your side this past year? What new resources have you brought your cause? Let me save you your breath, the answer is none. And the year before you secured 3, one of which I would argue is of questionable value at best and all little more than landed knights. And just what would you have me do? Slaughter my brothers? Murder my father's wife? You and I both know how that would end. I would have you send your men out to root out the Vulture King. I would have you court the Tyrells once again. I would have you try for another son. I would have you play the game once more, instead of miring yourself in contentment. You are a dragon," she bellowed, leaning forward with a fierce expression. I might have argued, but the sound of a bell ringing above deck and one of Laenor's men calling out that King's Landing was in sight had us both peering around. "Think on what I have said, Rhaenyra. Think good and hard, because I am not the only one who feels you do too little." The blade met the solid pine of the spear shaft as Lena managed a hasty block. She soon put distance between her and her opponent though, dancing back as he too drew back as if to decide how best to push forward and break Lena's defense. "Go Papa," shouted Jocelyn from the small crowd of children that had abandoned their own practice to watch. Hell, many of the actual knights had abandoned their practice, so I wasn't inclined to blame them. "Show her who is best," shouted Alice. If it was usual, before she broke her arm at least, to find Jocelyn in the training yard practicing with a blade under her father's supervision, then it was extremely unusual for Alice to be here. Yet Lena had decreed there would be a lesson after she had finished up with Aleandra, and my daughter may sulk and rage, but she had not tested Lena's punishments yet. Other members of the crowd included Aleandra, Rolf, Lucerys, and Eamon. It might usually include Alysanne too, but she had remained in bed this morning as Helena, her usual teacher in all things archery, was not feeling up to a lesson. She would not be able to hide her condition for much longer. "Go Mama," cheered Lucerys, much louder than my 2 daughters, earning himself a shove from my firstborn. I gave her a warning look before it descended into a fight, and she returned it with a cheeky grin before her attention went back to Lena and Laenor's match as they clashed once more. She had been more cheerful since our return, and her lessons with me, even just a month's worth of reading together, had done her a world of good confidence-wise. I can't say the past month had done much for me though. Whenever I had any free time, whenever I entered the throne room and gazed up at the twisted monstrosity of metal we call a throne, even whenever I slipped the good queen's crown onto my head, all I could recall were Rhaenys' words. "Are you your father's daughter, as I once feared? You seem happy to merely hold your position. To merely respond to the plots of others. Exactly as your father would do in your shoes." I tapped out an annoyed beat on the bench, hearing them echoing again in my head. I had long been frustrated that father was too keen to rest on his laurels. Were people experiencing that same frustration with me? Laenor had not seemed to think so when I had questioned him in the early morning hours. Perhaps it should be considered a sign that I was not able to bring myself to ask Joffrey his opinion? A sudden restlessness seized me, and I might have stood up and left had Laner not pushed past Lena's guard and knocked her into the dirt, placing the tip of his blade against her chest. She yielded with grace, and my children burst into wild cheering and swarmed over to their father to congratulate him. Aleandra and Luceris were quick to help Lena to her feet, a quick glance telling me she wasn't in too much pain. Rolf hovered nearby, clearly wondering if he should congratulate his mentor too. I met Laner's eyes as he pulled his helmet off and stood, making my way down towards him and the veritable mob of children he'd attracted. They parted before me, and I dropped a kiss to his cheek, prompting Jocelyn to make an exaggerated gagging sound, to the amusement of her peers. Her arm was still bound, and it would not be fully healed for a few more weeks yet. I could tell she was frustrated with the matter. Still, that did not preclude a little revenge. "You will have a husband of your own one day," I told her, nodding towards Rolf. His face promptly went the same color as his hair, and Jocelyn's eyes narrowed dangerously. Both of the twins had discovered their betrothals during this year's name day celebrations. As had Rolf, as a matter of fact, something that surprised me. Still, there had been no meltdowns or tantrums so far, although there had been some teasing of the twins on the matter. "At least you get Rolf," said Alice, tartly. "I get to marry Osgood." "What is wrong with Osgood?" asked Eamon, sounding perplexed. After Alice and Jocelyn's betrothals had been announced, he had come to me and asked if he had a similar arrangement waiting to be announced on his 10th name day too. I had told him that he was to marry one of Lord Barrow's daughters. The three storms, in this timeline, as Lady Elenda had given birth to a boy, named Oris, instead of Floris. "He's boring. And only a kid, like Emma," protested Alice as Lena joined us. "He will grow up," said Lena. "And it is your duty to marry him." I wasn't going to analyze the tone she was using there, although it earned her a questioning look from Laner at least. "An excellent fight, my children." We turned as one to find Corley strolling up to us, seemingly without a care in the world. He clapped his son on the arm as the attention of every child narrowed in on him. They loved Corley's and his stories, the ones that grew ever more exciting and dangerous as he told them. "Perhaps I may steal away my son and good daughter for a moment? Could it wait?" I asked, keeping my tone polite. I promised Jocelyn a lesson. "It's all right, Mama. I can practice with Eamon while you talk with Grandpapa." I glanced down at her earnest face. I did not think she was lying. "Do not pick a blade up yourself," I told her sternly before turning to Corley's. A few moments then, but no more, I did make a promise after all. Corley smiled warmly and gestured towards an empty part of the yard where we would be afforded a little privacy at least. His face soon became serious, and I bit back the urge to groan. "I thought it best to speak to you myself," he said quietly. "Rhaenys informs me you and she had words on the trip back from Dragonstone." "We did," I said, hearing those words once more. "She implied you agreed with her." He watched me with narrowed eyes for a moment and then nodded. "We have not always been so close, Rhaenyra, and I will not deny that we had a difficult start to our alliance. Yet, I will not play the sycophant even if you are given to distrusting me." I felt Laner tense next to me, and I resisted the urge to reach for him. "You once played the game aggressively, so aggressively I was worried it would bring us to ruin. Yet it did not, even if it did bring many unnecessary complications." I bristled without meaning to at the words unnecessary complications and what they implied. He had profited well from my unnecessary complications, and he knew it. The glassworks at Driftmark had repaid the Valerian investment many times over, and that was just one of my projects. "Father" began Laner, but Corlys cut him off. "You are playing the slow game now, reacting rather than making your own moves, but it is a valid strategy, even if I disapprove." He leaned back to look his son in the eye. "It's Driftmark I worry about the most, Laner." "What is wrong with it?" asked Laner, perplexed. "Nothing, our home thrives," he said. "Yet what will happen when I die, Laner?" "I will inherit and serve as Lord of the Tides," said Laner, confusion giving way to caution. I remained silent. Driftmark was not my wheelhouse. "And who will inherit after you?" Corlys asked. "Eamon will be king in time and Jocelyn the Lady of Castamere." The blade met the solid pine of the spear shaft as Lena managed a hasty block. She soon put distance between her and her opponent though, dancing back as he too drew back as if to decide how best to push forward and break Lena's defense. "Go Papa," shouted Jocelyn from the small crowd of children that had abandoned their own practice to watch. Hell, many of the actual knights had abandoned their practice, so I wasn't inclined to blame them. Show her who is best, shouted Alice. If it was usual, before she broke her arm at least, to find Jocelyn in the training yard practicing with a blade under her father's supervision, then it was extremely unusual for Alice to be here. Yet Lena had decreed there would be a lesson after she had finished up with Aleandra, and my daughter may sulk and rage, but she had not tested Lena's punishments yet. Other members of the crowd included Aleandra, Rolf, Luceris, and Eamon. It might usually include Alisanne too, but she had remained in bed this morning as Helena, her usual teacher in all things archery, was not feeling up to a lesson. She would not be able to hide her condition for much longer. Go mama, cheered Luceris, much louder than my 2 daughters, earning himself a shove from my firstborn. I gave her a warning look before it descended into a fight, and she returned it with a cheeky grin before her attention went back to Lena and Laner's match as they clashed once more. She had been more cheerful since our return, and her lessons with me, even just a month's worth of reading together, had done her a world of good confidence-wise. I can't say the past month had done much for me though. Whenever I had any free time, whenever I entered the throne room and gazed up at the twisted monstrosity of metal we call a throne, even whenever I slipped the good queen's crown onto my head, all I could recall were Rainie's words. Are you your father's daughter, as I once feared? You seem happy to merely hold your position. To merely respond to the plots of others. Exactly as your father would do in your shoes. I tapped out an annoyed beat on the bench, hearing them echoing again in my head. I had long been frustrated that father was too keen to rest on his laurels. Were people experiencing that same frustration with me? Laner had not seemed to think so when I had questioned him in the early morning hours. Perhaps it should be considered a sign that I was not able to bring myself to ask Joffrey his opinion? A sudden restlessness seized me, and I might have stood up and left had Laner not pushed past Lena's guard and knocked her into the dirt, placing the tip of his blade against her chest. She yielded with grace, and my children burst into wild cheering and swarmed over to their father to congratulate him. Aleandra and Luceris were quick to help Lena to her feet, a quick glance telling me she wasn't in too much pain. Rolf hovered nearby, clearly wondering if he should congratulate his mentor too. I met Laner's eyes as he pulled his helmet off and stood, making my way down towards him and the veritable mob of children he'd attracted. They parted before me, and I dropped a kiss to his cheek, prompting Jocelyn to make an exaggerated gagging sound, to the amusement of her peers. Her arm was still bound, and it would not be fully healed for a few more weeks yet. I could tell she was frustrated with the matter. Still, that did not preclude a little revenge. You will have a husband of your own one day, I told her, nodding towards Rolf. His face promptly went the same color as his hair, and Jocelyn's eyes narrowed dangerously. Both of the twins had discovered their betrothals during this year's name day celebrations. As had Rolf, as a matter of fact, something that surprised me. Still, there had been no meltdowns or tantrums so far, although there had been some teasing of the twins on the matter. At least you get Rolf, said Alice, tartly. I get to marry Osgood. What is wrong with Osgood? Asked Eamon, sounding perplexed. After Alice and Jocelyn's betrothals had been announced, he had come to me and asked if he had a similar arrangement waiting to be announced on his 10th name day too. I had told him that he was to marry one of Lord Barrow's daughters. The 3 storms, in this timeline, as Lady Elenda had given birth to a boy, named Oris, instead of Floris. He's boring. And only a kid, like Emma, protested Alice as Lena joined us. He will grow up, said Lena. And it is your duty to marry him. I wasn't going to analyze the tone she was using there. Although it earned her a questioning look from Laner at least. An excellent fight, my children. We turned as one to find Corley strolling up to us, seemingly without a care in the world. He clapped his son on the arm as the attention of every child narrowed in on him. They loved Corley's and his stories, the ones that grew ever more exciting and dangerous as he told them. Perhaps I may steal away my son and good daughter for a moment? Could it wait? I asked, keeping my tone polite. I promised Jocelyn a lesson. It's all right, Mama. I can practice with Eamon while you talk with Grandpapa. I glanced down at her earnest face. I did not think she was lying. Do not pick a blade up yourself. I told her sternly before turning to Corlys. A few moments then, but no more, I did make a promise after all. Corley smiled warmly and gestured towards an empty part of the yard where we would be afforded a little privacy at least. His face soon became serious, and I bit back the urge to groan. I thought it best to speak to you myself, he said quietly. Rhaenys informs me you and she had words on the trip back from Dragonstone. We did, I said, hearing those words once more. She implied you agreed with her. He watched me with narrowed eyes for a moment and then nodded. We have not always been so close, Rhaenyra, and I will not deny that we had a difficult start to our alliance. Yet, I will not play the sycophant even if you are given to distrusting me. I felt Laenor tense next to me, and I resisted the urge to reach for him. You once played the game aggressively, so aggressively I was worried it would bring us to ruin. Yet it did not, even if it did bring many unnecessary complications. I bristled without meaning to at the words unnecessary complications and what they implied. He had profited well from my unnecessary complications, and he knew it. The glassworks at Driftmark had repaid the Valerian investment many times over, and that was just one of my projects. Father began Laenor, but Corlys cut him off. You are playing the slow game now, reacting rather than making your own moves, but it is a valid strategy, even if I disapprove. He leaned back to look his son in the eye. It's Driftmark I worry about the most, Laenor. What is wrong with it? Asked Laenor, perplexed. Nothing, our home thrives, he said. Yet what will happen when I die, Laenor? I will inherit and serve as Lord of the Tides, said Laenor, confusion giving way to caution. I remained silent. Driftmark was not my wheelhouse. And who will inherit after you? Corlys asked. Aemon will be king in time and Jocelyn the Lady of Castamere. Syrax was still one of the greatest joys in my life. Nothing compared to the endless freedom of the skies, the feeling of her moving beneath me and the wind whipping by me as we soared. I could just hear Jocelyn's laughter and exclamations of delight as we swooped and circled, dropping low to the sea and flying so high that we flew above the clouds themselves. She screeched when I coaxed Syrax into a barrel roll, clutching at me half in fear and half in excitement. Eventually, I took us low over the bay and tapped her to get her attention. Watch how I use the whip, I told her. You will need to use yours a lot when you start riding, but you will get better and then you will need to use it less. I demonstrated a few turns, cracking the length of leather this way and that. Syrax turned obediently, the way I'd trained her to all those years ago. It was amusing to see my daughter so intent on the way my wrist moved and just where the whip cracked in relation to Syrax's head and what reaction it produced in my mount. What if I accidentally hit Morrigan? She asked, suddenly, her violet eyes wide. I responded by hitting Syrax as hard as I could on her armored shoulder. Jocelyn squealed in fear, but I doubted my dragon even noticed it. It was the sound they reacted to, of course, despite what non-riders may claim. These scales can take a hit from a ballista, I told my daughter, after she had opened her eyes once more. My Syrax can stand up to a strike from a whip. Jocelyn moved her hand out, leaning forward until I feared I would have to reach out and pull her back, and ran her fingers over the scales with a sigh of awe. I let my own, of relief, when she finally settled back. She was chained to me, and I knew that logically, but still. But, I said. That is not to say you can't hurt them. But if they can take a bolt, how could you? She asked, curiously. Remember how Syrax likes to have her head rubbed? And the skin is very soft? I smiled as she wriggled against me in excitement, catching the answer before I was able to tell her. No scales. What about the wings though? And what would happen if you did hurt her with the whip? She asked. The wings are hardened to a degree. They wouldn't take a bolt, but they shrug off arrows. Well, my Syrax would. You will need to be careful with Morrigan, her wings will still be quite delicate, despite the sheer size of her. She was bigger than Skywalker and bigger than Morgul too, although Frost still beat her in size. Tessarion too, strangely enough. The Blue Queen was a monster of a dragon and I had been alarmed to realize that if she kept growing as she did, she would soon challenge Frost in size. And from there, Syrax was the next biggest dragon up from him. It infuriated Lena to no end, of course. Tessarion was a pit dragon, yet her growth was faster than even non-pit dragons. Hell, it infuriated me. Yet it was Lena that pointed out the issue. It was magic, quite simply, and magic was never predictable. The knowledge had yet to stop her grinding her teeth whenever she encountered the Blue Queen. And what would happen if I did hurt her? She asked. I hummed with thought. I have never hurt Syrax, but I would imagine she'd throw me off if I were incautious enough to, I told her. She pressed close to me and I wrapped my arm around her, smiling when she brought her unbroken hand up to grip at my forearm. Tomorrow we will begin training Morrigan to respond to the sound of the whip, I told her. It would not be too hard, dragons only got hard to truly teach when they'd breached 100, as Lena had discovered with her bad-tempered old lady. Now, would you like another ride? For educational purposes, of course. When we finally landed, I had been in the air far longer than I had initially planned. Jocelyn was wide-eyed and panting with exhilaration. I kept up the thin pretense of a lesson though, by having her help me remove Sirex's gear and examine it, very solemnly, for signs of wear or damage. Then we stored it safely and turned our attention to the other occupants of the shed. Alice was not enjoying her lesson. The new gear, made especially for Vermithor, was laid out in front of her and Lena loomed over her, arms crossed with a frown. My daughter glanced up and gave me a mournful look. "Mama, please," she said. "I know all of this. She is making me do it again when I get it wrong, but I get it wrong because I'm tired." I opened my mouth to say something and then closed it again when Lena raised an eyebrow, as if challenging me to say something. I had agreed I would cede all power to her, and Jocelyn was staring at me too. "You have the option to leave," said Lena. "I did tell you that." "But then you'll punish me," protested my daughter. Lena merely hummed in agreement. "That's not fair." "It is. Now start again." Lena was relentless, staring down my daughter, who turned back to her gear with an angry sigh. "Oh, one of Joff's men is waiting for you. Something about an urgent raven." Now that was alarming. I didn't bother saying goodbye as I strode towards the door, Jocelyn trotting after me obediently. As promised, I found one of Joffrey's runners taking refuge from the summer sun under the eaves of the shed. When he saw me he scrambled to his feet and bowed low. "Aye Grace," he said, his accent betraying his flea-bottom heritage. "Sir Joffrey sent me why news." "I thank you for making the trip. What news does my good brother send me?" The man patted down his pockets and removed a note, written in a hand that I recognized immediately. Joffrey's neat letters. I took it and passed him a moon for his troubles. He bowed low again, and then bowed to Jocelyn for good measure, before trudging back to his horse and setting off back towards the city. "Jocelyn, go and keep Syrax company," I told my daughter. She hesitated, her eyes fixed on the note before giving in. I watched her jog over to where Syrax was bathing in the shallows, before breaking the seal. I made one read through, before smothering the urge to scream in annoyance. Bernard fucking Stark. I had known, of course, that he had not given up on his dreams of the North. Just like I had known his success in Dorne had given him bargaining power with the Northern lords who resented being held back as others went to win glory. When Rickon Stark had died unexpectedly as winter finally retreated from even the North, he had been at the forefront of installing Lord Baron Karstark as regent for his young nephew. Normally, I would not have cared. If Bernard prevailed, he would owe me. If Cregan prevailed, I had not invested anything in Bernard to lose, and while he was a known black, he was not so close to my cause that Cregan might think I had a hand in his attempt. Perhaps Bernard had figured this out because he had promptly all but publicly tied my name to his by arranging the trade deal that saw the glassworks sell to White Harbor at a cut price. In one fell swoop, the annoyingly charming Stark had made it all about him. That he had so won my favor that I had been moved to gift the North with cut prices, and that I would only continue to favor him as time went on. Which, of course, was when Barrows gave him Red Wolf's Hold, the lands that had once been Will, albeit with a healthy chunk cut out of them and given to Nightsong of course. I wasn't stupid. I knew what the optics were like. The people of the North praised both my name and his in the same sentence, a fact Cregan could not ignore if he won in his struggle against his uncle. So I had given Bernard leeway I should not and hoped that he could weather the storm he had started in the North gracefully enough that Cregan could not afford to go against his uncle for fear of offending lords more loyal to Bernard than him. It would appear that I had been proven wrong. Not 3 weeks past, Lord Cregan Stark had imprisoned Lord Baron and his sons, declaring them traitors that sought to profit off of the regency. No mention of Bernard of course, but the message was clear to any looking for it. It was a challenge: come face me uncle and you will find I rule the North. Now Bernard rode for King's Landing, seeking my aid and advice. No doubt he would bring with him a horde of Barrows Marcher kin. The Lord of the Stormlands would become vexed if I refused to help, and so Bernard would get his way once more. If what was written in fire and blood had the right of it, then Cregan was even better than Bernard at this. The Hour of the Wolf was beginning to make more and more sense as time went on, and I was consistently made a fool of by these Northerners. Are you your father's daughter, as I once feared? You seem happy to merely hold your position. To merely respond to the plots of others. Exactly as your father would do in your shoes. I crumpled the note, annoyed. I should have seen this coming. I should have headed it off at the pass. Rainie's words stung worse as I realized they were true. Damn her. And damn me for letting it get this bad. Jocelyn. We are heading back to the city, I called. My daughter ceased in her attention to Syrax and began scrambling back towards me. Syrax grumbled, annoyed, but soon clambered to her feet and waded even further into the water, seemingly enjoying the water lapping over her. What was in the letter? Jocelyn asked, eyes flickering to me nervously, after we had mounted up and begun our ride. Lord Bernard is coming to visit, I replied. She grinned. Really? Do you think he's bringing Ben? I paused and examined her. Benjen was Bernard's oldest and the current heir to Red Wolf Hold. He was betrothed to a Karen and was a few years older than the twins. He was also the spitting image of his father, and the two shared a good portion of their personality too. She blushed under my attention and I smiled knowingly, which only made her face redder. In all likelihood, no, I told her finally. He is coming because his good father has gotten into a spot of trouble. That is, a Karstark? Oh my. A crush indeed if she'd even taken the time to remember what family his mother came from. Lord Baron Karstark, I told her. Then I let my features become grim. Lord Cregan alleges that the bookkeeping for Winterfell during his time as regent was of dubious quality. She was silent for a long time and I rolled my eyes. He has accused Lord Karstark of stealing his money, little one. Why would he do that? She asked, perplexed. Surely Lord Karstark is not so hard up for coin, or so dishonorable. Never underestimate the depths a man, or woman, can plumb when they are desperate, or are given unchecked power, I told my daughter. But I am of the same opinion. Lord Karstark is not the type. It is why Lord Bernard seeks my aid on the matter. And what will you do? She asked. I do not know, I replied, honestly. She looked at me with raised eyebrows. But I have until Lord Bernard arrives to think of something, little one. If you want to support me, check out my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/Kayashin. I tend to polls that decide important plot stuff in my P at Trian. Many thanks to my awesome patrons. Wilnet Duverne, Yami Tancho, Ben Phillips. If you liked the content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I'll stay here until next time.